Imagine this. One night, you're walking alone down a dark country road through the woods. Suddenly, you hear heavy, low breathing behind you, like something is slowly closing in. You spin around, but what you see is nothing like you've ever imagined. It looks somewhat like a gorilla, its skin slick and grayish-white, shining with an oily sheen under the dim light. But it has no hair, and the most terrifying part, it has no neck, no head, yet it walks upright like a man. At that moment, would you freeze in fear, too shocked to even run? This isn't a scene from a horror movie. It was a real event, reported in the small town of Grafton, West Virginia, back in the 1960s. It was a foggy night in November 1966. On Route 119, a 38-year-old newspaper reporter named Robert Cockrell was driving home near Grafton. Earlier that day, Robert had been covering a story about missing miners and then stayed late at the office writing his article. By the time he finally hit the road, he was exhausted, rubbing his temples and just wanting to get home for some sleep. But as he rounded a bend in the road, his headlights swept across the roadside brush, and that's when he saw it. At first, Robert thought it was just a bear, maybe an elk. But as his car drew closer, the headlights revealed something else entirely, a creature standing over 9 feet tall. Its skin was disturbingly human-like, but under the lights it shone with a pale, greasy glow. Its body was slightly hunched, shoulders broad, muscles bulging, its arms long and powerful. And then came the most horrifying detail. This massive thing had no head. Its body looked pieced together, limbs moving stiffly, awkwardly, as if it sensed the world in some way beyond human understanding. Slowly, heavily, it stepped forward. Robert's scalp tingled with dread. For a moment, he thought maybe his tired eyes were playing tricks on him, but the figure stood there plain as day. His instincts as a reporter kicked in. He reached for his camera, yet his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't even hold it steady. Just as he managed to get control of himself, he noticed the creature sway slightly, like it was about to move toward him. That was it. Cold sweat broke out all over Robert's body. Without a second thought, he slammed his foot on the gas. The engine roared, and the car shot through the darkness. Only when he reached town did Robert finally start to calm down. But even then, his heart was still pounding. That night at home, he couldn't sleep. Every time he shut his eyes, the image of that headless monster came rushing back. The next morning, drained and pale, Robert went to the office. After his co-workers pressed him with questions, he finally told them what had happened. At first, they laughed, said he was just overtired imagining things. But as Robert described it in more detail, his tone dead serious, the laughter faded. Someone finally suggested, "Why don't we go out there and check for ourselves?" Everyone agreed, and they even brought along local police to investigate the spot Robert had described. When they arrived, they didn't find any monster, but they didn't come back empty-handed either. At the very place Robert pointed out, the grass was crushed flat, as if something massive had stood there. And just a little further away, the police discovered several patches of thick, black, foul-smelling slime. Samples were taken immediately and rushed to the lab. The results stunned everyone. Substance unknown. Not from any known animal, the story hit like a bombshell. Without Robert's permission, one of his co-workers rushed the news into print, and it landed on the front page. Overnight, word of a headless monster roaming near Grafton spread like wildfire. Fear gripped the town. At night, people refused to go out. Parents warned their kids to stay far away from the woods. Some families even hung crucifixes and garlic at their doorsteps, desperate to ward off the creature. Just when the headless monster had the whole town of Grafton living in fear, an elder stepped forward and shared an old legend, one that made the creature's existence feel all the more possible. According to this elder, the land of Grafton was cursed from the very beginning. Back in the early 1900s, the Shawnees still lived here. They farmed along the river valley, hunted in the forests, and every night they gathered around campfires to dance and pray. They believed this land was different from anywhere else, because long ago the Shawnee had fought a brutal war against a rival tribe. In that battle, a young and fearless Shawnee warrior was decapitated by his enemies, his body collapsing right here in these woods. Normally, his soul should have returned to his ancestors through sacred rituals, but with his head taken away, he lost the path home. His spirit was forced to linger in the mortal world. From then on, deep in the forests of Grafton, people began to speak of a headless guardian, forever protecting the land of his people. Shawnee elders said this headless guardian was towering in size. Though he had no head, he could still sense everything around him. He wasn't truly alive, but he wasn't a ghost either. He was trapped between both worlds. That's why the elders warned the young never to enter the woods on foggy days, because that's when the headless guardian would appear. His footsteps were heavy, and he'd suddenly show up right behind you. Too close, too fast for you to ever escape. Legend has it that in the winter of 1912, a white hunter came to Grafton hoping to hunt in the forest. The Shawnee warned him not to go in at dusk, especially when the fog rolled in. But the hunter ignored their words. Days later, his body was found by the riverbank, pale as chalk, as if all the blood had been drained from him. His head was gone. The Shawnee elders declared this was the punishment of the headless guardian. What's even more terrifying is what happened afterward. As time went on, the Shawnee were gradually forced to leave this land. Without the faith of his people to sustain him, the headless guardian's spirit twisted into the monster Robert had seen that night on the highway. He still roams the forest, his soul never at peace, bound forever to the land that once belonged to him. With all the rumors spreading and panic growing, the local government tried to calm people's fears by sending police patrols along the highways and the forest's edge. But the patrols never encountered the monster. The only thing they ever noticed on a few foggy nights was a strange smell drifting through the air, like disinfectant mixed with rotting leaves. And it's this seemingly unimportant detail that sparked the creepiest theory about the headless monster. Some people claim that in Grafton's old asylum, doctors once carried out horrifying head transplant experiments. They used mental patients as test subjects, obsessed with breaking the limits of the human body and chasing after so-called immortality. The experiments, of course, ended in failure. Patients became headless monstrosities, escaped the asylum, and hid deep within the forest. The rumor sounds absurd, but no one can fully dismiss it, because the asylum itself, abandoned and decayed, feels like a silent witness to the story behind it. The asylum was built in 1910, originally to treat tuberculosis patients. Back then, TB was almost a death sentence. Patients were sent to a remote hillside sanatorium, far from town, left to wait out their fate in solitude. As medicine advanced and tuberculosis became more controllable, the facility was converted into a psychiatric hospital in the 1930s. Then, in 1945, the hospital was suddenly shut down. The official reason was simple: lack of funding. But the town's elders never believed that explanation. They whispered another version. Terrible things had happened inside those walls. For a time, patients began disappearing, one after another. At night, people swore they could hear heavy footsteps echoing down the corridors, like some giant thing pacing the halls. Decades later, the asylum's walls still show faint stains of blood and long, dark scratch marks, evidence, locals say, of patients desperately trying to escape. Kids in town would dare each other to go there, but none of them ever had the courage to get close after dark. Then in 2005, a group of urban explorers broke into the restricted property. They carried cameras and prowled the ruins, searching for ghosts. Nobody expected what they found in the basement: a diary. The handwriting was messy, the entries were fragmented, but the pages dripped with an undeniable fear. One entry read, October 17th, 1944. Another patient is missing today. The basement door was open. There's a black liquid on the floor. The doctors told us not to tell anyone. They said it's a normal occurrence. Another. November 3rd, 1944. I saw it during my night shift. No head, white skin. It walked out of the patient's room and toward the basement. I couldn't make a sound. I hid in a closet and listened to its footsteps. And this. November 15th, 1944. The doctor says we must dispose of it, but I know they can't. It isn't human anymore. It's a monster. I must leave. I will never come back. The diary stops there. The final pages were torn out. No one knows what happened to the nurse who wrote it. The explorers handed the diary over to the local museum. Museum staff said the diary's authenticity couldn't be verified and suggested it might be a modern hoax, an eerie artifact created to shock. But oddly, the dates in the diary line up with the period when patients reportedly went missing at the hospital. That coincidence makes the fake explanation feel thin. From that point on, two very different stories took hold in town. Some people firmly believe the headless monster is the result of the asylum's experiments. According to this version, doctors there crossed forbidden lines in the name of progress, creating malformed beings no one could control. The other version is even stranger. The headless monster isn't a single creature at all, but a conglomeration of the grudges and tormented spirits of all the patients who died there. Souls long imprisoned, abused and ignored, the legend goes, gathered together the night the hospital closed, forming a headless entity born of collective anguish. One explanation points to science gone wrong, the other points to the supernatural. Both, however, converge on the same chilling fact. The Grafton headless monster is more than just a rumor. So if you ever pass through Grafton on a foggy night, remember, do not get out of your car alone. Don't stare into the woods, and whatever you do, don't go looking for that pale, headless figure, because you never know. Maybe it's already looking right back at you.